first thing he noticed was the smell ozone and wet earth, sharp and unnatural, as if the atmosphere itself was tearing. His skin prickled, not from the cold, but from a pressure that seemed to seep into his bones, thick and cloying like oil. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the ground, a frequency that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. Every muscle locked. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, held in place by a terror so absolute it felt like a physical weight on his chest. Then came the whispers, not from around him, but from inside his own skull. A chorus of dry, scraping voices speaking in a language of rust and decay. His body was no longer his own. He could feel it shifting, a slow, wet reknitting of tissue and bone, obeying a will that was not his. This was not death. It was a transformation into something that had never been meant to exist. A new and terrible thing forged in the void. And the worst part? Some deep animal part of him welcomed it. This isn't science fiction. This is the story of Leo Mercer, and the price he paid was to become a medical impossibility. In the sun-scorched desert of Edwards Air Force Base, California, 1963, Captain Leo Mercer was the embodiment of the right stuff. Young, sharp, with a smile that could disarm a general, he was an aerospace engineer and a test pilot. A man who spoke in equations and thrived on the razor's edge of physics. To his wife Claire, he was simply Leo, the man who charred Sunday morning pancakes. But to the US government, he was something else entirely. A phantom, an asset, the man with two lives, and a secret that smelled of ozone and cold steel. The Air Force had selected the perfect candidate for Project Icarus, a shadowy program probing the absolute limits of high-altitude ejection. The question was stark, terrifying. If a pilot had to eject at the very frontier of the atmosphere, could a human body endure? The air grew thin and biting, carrying the faint metallic scent of ozone and cold machinery. Every calculation, every simulation, led to this moment of silent, profound dread. Techs in sterile white coats encircled the device. Leo clung to the mission's noble purpose. "It's about saving future pilots, Claire," he'd insist, his voice tight with conviction. The peril was merely a series of cold calculations on a screen, an abstract equation of risk and probability. Until the day the numbers bled into reality and the equation solved itself. October 17th, 1963. The flight was proceeding flawlessly, a perfect ascent into the heavens. But at 19 miles above the Earth, as the atmosphere thinned to the official edge of space, everything changed. The cockpit filled with the sharp, acrid scent of ozone and hot metal, a tangible warning in the thinning air. Then, a deep, resonant hum began to vibrate through the fuselage, a sound that felt more like pressure against the skin than something heard. A catastrophic pressure seal failure tore through the cockpit's integrity. Leo didn't eject. He was flung out into the silent, airless void, a tiny suited doll. The sudden, absolute cold seeped through his suit, a deep, invasive chill. All sound vanished, replaced by the raw, metallic scent of breached systems and the profound stillness of the vacuum. For 90 agonizing seconds, Leo tumbled through the suffocating void of space, his suit holding against impossible odds. The infinite blackness yawned above him, a cold nothingness that leached the warmth from his bones through the suit's layers. Below, Earth unfurled like a breathtaking, living tapestry of blues and swirling whites, a sight of profound beauty that served as his funeral shroud. In that moment, a crystalline, absolute certainty settled over him. He was witnessing the last thing he would ever see. The rushing wind returned, swelling from a whisper to a deafening roar that filled the void. The very atmosphere seemed to clench around him, transforming his fall into a violent, unstoppable plunge. Heat bloomed around his body, a searing corona of friction that ignited the air. He was no longer falling. He was a meteor, a man-shaped piece of debris screaming back into the world he'd left behind. The G-forces should have shredded him. The impact with the denser air should have pulverized every bone. But Leo didn't break. Instead, a deep, resonant groan vibrated through his skeleton. He felt a profound, impossible bending, not of metal, but of his very being. His body struck the New Mexico desert at over 300 miles per hour, carving a 6-foot crater. Rescue teams arrived, steeling themselves for the grim task of retrieving a mangled corpse. The air was thick with the scent of scorched earth and the metallic promise of blood. But what they found in that pit defied every expectation of physics and flesh. The scene was chaos. Grainy footage, medics scrambling, the crater's edge a ragged wound in the earth. They pulled Leo Mercer from the pit, his body twisted at impossible angles, limbs frozen in a grotesque tableau. Yet against all reason, against the very laws of nature, this event seemed to defy. He was whole, and in that moment of absolute dread, as the cold night air carried the scent of ozone and burnt earth, one impossible truth remained. Leo Mercer was alive. Conscious and gasping in the sterile military hospital, the X-rays revealed an impossibility. The metallic scent of the room mixed with the sterile, antiseptic air as the medical team stared. There were no compound fractures, no shattered bones to explain the patient's agony. The quiet hum of medical equipment underscored a truth that defied all logic. There was no shattered pelvis. Instead, his bones were malformed. They had warped and twisted, grotesquely misshapen. It was as if they had melted like wax, then solidified again into this wrong, alien architecture. The scent of ozone and sterile metal hung in the cold, still air of the viewing room. His spine coiled in a serpentine curve, while his ribcage twisted asymmetrically. The lead surgeon, Dr. Evans, identified it as plastic osseous deformation, a term that hung in the sterile air like a clinical curse. In layman's terms, his very bones were warping, as if the skeleton itself had turned against its own architecture. The scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the deeper, unsettling odor of something fundamentally wrong. Under the immense, sustained pressure of his plummet, Leo Mercer's bones didn't fracture. They transformed into a pliable, elastic substance. They flowed, a grotesque liquid, to dissipate the catastrophic energy. His very framework had performed one final, horrific act of self-preservation. Dr. Evans. His body chose the only possible path to survival, even if it meant ceasing to be structurally human. He is, biomechanically, a freak of physics. When the sedation wore off, Leo's true hell began. The pain was a living thing, a deep, grinding ache no morphine could touch. It settled in his bones like cold iron, whispering through every nerve with relentless, mechanical precision. His body became a prison of soft, unstable stone. Then came the changes. His posture collapsed inward. He gained a permanent, painful stoop. The air smelled of damp earth and cold iron. His limbs now hung with a subtle, unsettling misalignment. The handsome symmetry of his face had settled into a gentle, uncanny asymmetry that felt deeply wrong. Months later, the screen shows Leo's agonizing struggle with a cane, each step a battle against his own body. Claire watches, a hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a sob, her eyes glistening with helpless tears. Claire tried. She tried. God knows she tried. But the man who returned was not her Leo. He was a stranger, his familiar form now housing something utterly alien. The psychological fracture was absolute, complete in its terrible finality. What remained was merely a distorted mirror of the man she once loved. He withdrew into a heavy silence, tormented not by the memory of the fall, but by the alien vessel of flesh and bone it had left him in. Years later, in the stark quiet of a small, sparse apartment, an elderly man with a painfully twisted posture moves with agonizing slowness. The air carries the faint, metallic scent of old pain and the musty odor of a life confined. At the windowsill, his gnarled fingers tremble slightly as he offers seed to a waiting sparrow, a fragile, silent communion in his haunted world. Leo Mercer lived another 45 years, a medical marvel, his case studied in textbooks, the man who fell from space and survived. But every breath was a cruel reminder. Each inhalation carried the faint, metallic taste of ozone and the phantom scent of burnt wiring. Every window pane reflected a body that had warped itself to preserve his life. Those gnarled hands now cradled a photograph of his younger self, standing proud and straight-backed in a flight suit. He never flew again, retreating into the stale air and perpetual twilight of his apartment. To the world, it was a miracle of survival. To him, it was a prison of his own mangled flesh. Leo Mercer lived inside the miracle's terrible cost. His bones, once the strong, silent architecture of a hero, had become a permanent, pliable monument to a single, terrible moment. The air in the room tasted of stale dust and a faint, metallic tang of old blood. Every joint ached with a damp, persistent cold that no fire could touch. From the floorboards below came a faint, insistent scratching, a sound that had no source and never ceased. So what was the price of cheating death? Leo didn't perish in the desert that day. His body made a desperate bargain with physics. It traded rigid structure for raw survival, solidity for something far more fluid. A faint scent of ozone and hot stone hung in the air as his form began to change. He didn't lose his life. He lost his very shape to the indifferent desert. It made him, quite literally, a flexible ghost. The screen fades to black. White text appears starkly against the void. We celebrate the survival, but ask yourself, at what point does the body we saved stop being the person we knew? Leo Mercer fell from the stars, a cascade of cosmic dust and silent screams. What returned was a vessel the world had never seen, humming with a cold, metallic scent. He was trapped inside it, every whisper of his old self echoing in a prison of alien flesh and bone. The final sound faded into the void, leaving only a faint, lonely desert wind to whisper through the empty space. It carried the scent of dry earth and ancient dust, a tactile chill that clung to the skin. This was not a wind of comfort, but a hollow breath drawn from a place long abandoned. Then, even that lonely whisper ceased, and the world was left in a profound, watchful stillness.